right, guys, let's do this. Let's get problematic. That was a mistake, but I'm keeping it in. Okay, so if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I've been tweeting a lot about this whole problematic zeitgeist that has been going on the internet. Personally, I think it's exhausting, but I put it out there and I said I'd make a video about it, so here I am. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time, I'm sorry. So I guess before we start, I need to define a couple of things. So problematic in the current terminology basically just means an element to a piece of media that you find, and you being reader, listener, watcher, distressing, morally abhorrent, physically abhorrent, blah, blah, blah. Some things that are listed as problematic in fiction are like incest or transphobia or just other things that are bad. None of that is invalid, but we're having a conversation for a reason. Now, if you are a fan of mine, you know that I have not one but two podcasts, and one of them is The Owie Shelf, in which we talk about boys' love, me and a friend of mine, and we have an entire episode on problematic elements, especially in boys' love, because it is a genre particularly filled with things that are considered to be problematic by the fans. Now, when I say the fans, I mean especially this younger generation. I really hate making it an age thing, but when I look back at the fan media that I was consuming back in the day, all of it was bad. Like, just patently, everything that I was consuming when it came to fan fiction or fan works back in the day was bad and problematic. But it wasn't problematic to us. That was just how we interacted with fandom and fan works. That's just what we did. So we didn't have the same issues with things like age gaps or bad terminology for trans people or anything like that. It was the 90s and 2000s. We just didn't have concerns about that. Now, if you've listened to that Galley Ship episode, and if you haven't, I really recommend that you do, not just because it's a podcast that I'm on, but because I think it'll also help you have a lot of context to how I feel about this stuff. I tend to not throw around that word a lot, mostly because to me, most things aren't really problematic. They're just not for me, or they're old. If I'm looking at something that is particularly from a different era or time or something like that, then that's not problematic. That's just older. And if it's something that personally, let's say, triggers me, a word that I don't like using for various reasons, again, I assume that media is just not for me. I have my bucket of trauma, and it is not the responsibility of every author to acquiesce to my needs, wishes, or desires. Now, if a creator is willfully doing something terrible, then I keep moving on. We're going to come back to that point in a minute while I take a sip of this off-brand cola. Now then, the current zeitgeist of the whole, throwing problematic around, to say that I hate it is an understatement of understatements. As a person who critiques media, anything that shuts down conversation is something that I am passionately against. I want people to talk, and I think saying that something is problematic is a great way to stop conversation. Now, if you have a valid gripe about something, say it, say your piece, and keep on pushing. You don't have to berate an author or an artist or anything. And truth be told, and here's where I really have issue with the whole that's problematic thing, it isn't always universal, especially when it comes to fiction. Here's something that might be a surprise that I guess is surprising to some. If it's fiction, it's not real. So for a lot of people in fiction, they have a much higher tolerance for things that they wouldn't in real life. Look at the things that we're willing to watch in anime that we would have a much harder time dealing with in a sitcom. That's kind of the beauty of fiction. It isn't real. It's a place that you can see some of these things that might be taboo or weird or strange, as long as it's not real. I personally think that there are very few things in fiction that are truly problematic. I think the biggest things that can be problematic are human people. So if an actor or an actress says something racist, that's problematic. If a fan fiction uses a less than kind word about bisexuality, that's not problematic. That's just bad writing, in my opinion. Here's one thing that I say that if you do encounter something problematic, that you should do. Actually, there's 2 pieces of advice I'm going to give you. If you see something that's problematic in fiction, because again, I will not say that problematic things don't exist as far as like real people. To me, but then again, that's not problematic, that's just racist. So if an actor or actress says something racist, they're not problematic, they're racist. I'm all over the place because this is a video that I want to get out, but I'm so upset about this topic because it does feel like this gross ageist movement. It does seem to be uniquely the issue of younger fans, mostly barking at older fans, which, kids, stop. Get off of the internet, please. So let's get back to the point. Let's say you're scrolling on Twitter, I don't know, and you see a thread, and it's fan fiction. It's a fan fiction thread. And you see an element there that you find problematic. Cool. What are your options? Well, you can voice your opinion. It's the internet. You are allowed to do that. I fundamentally believe that if you're publishing something online, you are always subject to criticism. Always. Whether it is wanted or not. If I did not want comment, I would not post something on the internet. I'm just going to leave that there. So, you can say your piece. Now, for me as a creator, I don't have to do shit. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I don't have to do anything. I don't owe anyone a rationale or an explanation unless it's actively harmful. And if it's fiction, it's probably not. Let's just be real. If it's fiction, especially if it's fan fiction, it's probably not actually harmful. I digress. Or you can do the thing that I wish more people did, which is what I do all the time when I'm scrolling and I see something I don't like. Keep moving. Literally, no one is holding you down. No one is making you read this. No one is making you interact with it. No one is forcing you to look at this stuff. Especially if you're going to say that it's triggering, no one is making you stay. I don't like belittling the whole trigger warning argument because I do think that it's valid. I get triggered by stuff. But guess what I do? I either stay in that moment because it's media and that's what it should do, is cause a reaction, or I leave. It's not on the creator to know my trauma. That's not what media exists for. That's just not what it's here for. Books are meant to elicit a response. Good fan fiction should elicit a response. Good fan art, or just art in general, should elicit a response. Now, if that response happens to be triggering, there's no way an artist can know any person's individual triggers. And depending on the day, sometimes I actually like that feeling. I like feeling that vulnerable, and I like feeling that shock. Sometimes. There is something that I do wish that more fans did, which is just keep pushing. Just keep going. Please stop yelling at creators. Please. And again, I don't say don't provide critique. I think critique is great. I would not publish online if I didn't want critique. But please stop yelling at creators. I don't think that there's a less helpful comment than that's problematic. That is such an unhelpful comment. Just, why? I have concerns about this false purity that exists on the internet nowadays. Maybe because it is in stark contrast to the licentious internet that I grew up with, where everything was hypersexualized and no one cared about the morals of a 13-year-old who was writing smutfic. Maybe it's because it stands in a very, very stark difference to the experience I had online and in real life of being sexualized immediately as a kid. Maybe it's because I fundamentally don't understand why you would judge anyone else that strictly, or why you would do so in such crass language. There's a myriad of reasons why I probably don't understand this current zeitgeist of that's problematic, and with that, the current berating of creators that many of them I respect and admire. At the end of the day, creators don't owe us anyone. And yelling at them is rarely ever a way to get your point across. And if you genuinely have an issue with a thing, there's a myriad of ways that you can express that better. But if you ever come to me and say that this is problematic, I certainly hope that you have the ammunition necessary to actually make a case. Because if you ever lob "that's problematic" at me and think that you're walking away from that argument, you are sorely mistaken, friend. I've been in this fan world for a very long time, and I understand all of the ways that the things that we love are complex, are bad, are challenging, are confusing, or are just sometimes downright sublime and surreal. If you're just going to say something is problematic because you don't like it, I'm going to need you to be able to back up your sources and bring in some receipts, okay? If you're a creator on the end of someone yelling "that's problematic" at you, the social internet's beautiful. Block them. You don't have to interact with anyone. Remember, creators don't owe you anything. I actually saw this happen not too long ago where a creator deleted a piece of work entirely based on one person's negative experience. Now, I admire that creator. I admire their willingness to listen to that one person. All it did for me was make me realize that I'm not that kind of a creator. Now, again, if I'm actively doing harm, if I receive the same feedback multiple times, then sure, I'm willing to look at it. But I cannot imagine a situation where I would acquiesce to one person's whim. People make art. Sometimes that's difficult. And sometimes we do that for fun. That's the beautiful thing about the usually traumatized mind of artists and writers, is that sometimes we make art of things that isn't always beautiful because our lives haven't always been beautiful. And sometimes we do it just because we can. And if that bothers you, well, excuse my beauty. Sometimes that's just what we do. This isn't a Clockwork Orange. No one's making you read this. No one's making you read, dubious consent. No one is forcing you into reading ABO. No one's doing that. If you don't like an element of a piece, keep on going. And be kind about it. And understand that as people on the social internet, that our words do have a lot of weight. And if you continue to lob baseless criticism at people, it will start to affect them. And I struggle to think about what it would be like if I was still more actively publishing as I was when I was younger. Frankly, I struggle to think about the writer I would be now. I struggle to think about if I could manage that level of just ridiculous criticism. I wonder if I'd keep writing at all. Be kind to your creators, listen to your audience when you can. And just know, realistically, as most things when it comes to dealing with patriarchal and misogynistic societies, realistically, everything is problematic. So, you better have another reason as to why you don't like a piece. And if you are going to say it's problematic, I really, really need you to have more explanations to why. It's a great way to shut down a conversation, but to me, that's a weak argument. You should never want to shut down a conversation. It should be a way to open up a conversation, to talk about why a piece can be improved upon, how it can be better, or how it can be more universally accepted. That might not be the goal. This whole thing is weird to me. If you had ever told me that when I was, let's say at my height, 16 and writing fanfic every day, basically, that the internet would be full of people that were now my age and for some reason were aghast by every vivacious and licentious act ever created, I'd laugh at you. I don't really know what happened. Maybe it's because all of the youth have a bigger vocabulary to explain slights than I ever did. Maybe it's just times changing. Maybe it's a mutated nostalgia cycle. I don't know where this weird false purity came from. But I do know this. Things will get better for artists because eventually they'll just stop caring. Things will get worse for people who ingest this media because they will have to contend with increasingly defensive artists. And the internet will just get more toxic. And I don't want that. So to wrap things up, everything is probably a little bit problematic. Talk about elements that you think are problematic with some modicum of sense. And for the most part, just be kind. It's really a lot easier than you think. I know this was probably a little bit scattered, but I wanted to get this out of my system before I let it linger and fester in me any longer. Hopefully next video we'll talk about something a little bit more chill. See you guys.